Hi everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the organisers for including ACON to come and speak at this. It's really important that LGBTI people are included in discussions about alcohol and other drugs. And just in case anyone doesn't know, LGBTI stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and intersex people. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. We're meeting on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and pay my respects to any Aboriginal people in the room at the moment. So, today I'm hoping that I can leave you with some insights into the needs of young people and who are using alcohol and other drugs, as well as some tips to improve your own practice when working with LGBTI communities. So a little bit about ACON. ACON is the New South Wales Health Promotion Organisation specialising in HIV prevention, HIV support and LGBTI health. So basically that means we're here for gay and homosexually active men and aiming to reduce HIV transmission, and we're also here to promote the lifelong health of LGBTI people and people who are living with HIV. So a little bit about drug use in the LGBT community. I just want to say that I shouldn't actually be there because unfortunately we don't have any data on intersex people's patterns of drug use. And I'd also like to just point out that we don't have a lot of data about LGBTI people, young people's patterns of drug use. So we are generalising off data that's around adults basically. So this shows that since 2010 right through to 2016, the rates of alcohol and other drug use amongst LGBT people is dramatically higher than it is for heterosexual people. That's across all of the drugs there you can see: smoking, alcohol, any illicit drug, cannabis, ecstasy, methamphetamine, cocaine and pharmaceuticals. And in fact, you can see that 42% of homosexual and bisexual people have reported illicit drug use compared to only 14.5% of heterosexual people. And when we look at something like methamphetamine, the use is 5.8 times higher for LGBT people. This chart only shows for homosexual and bisexual people, but the transgender data is the same. So basically what that tells us is, given the amount of use of AOD in the LGBT community, we need mainstream services to be able to be responsive to this and able to be inclusive. Because while there are some specific services that are LGBT, such as ACON and 2010 and the Gender Centre, they're not enough to cover everything, basically. So, just going to skip that slide. Okay. So when we're looking at drug use, we've also got to look at why the drugs are being used and where they're being used. So basically, one thing they found is that the pattern of drug use has less to do with the pharmacology of the drug and more to do with the context and the reasons and motivations for wanting to use the drugs. For example, recreational drug use is highly associated with dance parties and sexual encounters within the LGBT community. Other reasons that people end up using drugs are due to minority stress factors such as stigma, family and community rejection and discrimination. For example, there's very high rates of crystal use, so methamphetamine use amongst people living with HIV. And while there's not a great deal of data as to why that is, from experiences working with clients, you often hear that it's they use the crystal to escape the stigma of living with HIV, and it's a chance to escape from it all. So, yeah. One thing to also consider is that the different ways of using will carry different risks. So, obviously, if someone's injecting, there's different risks, for instance, bloodborne viruses, than there is if they're smoking. But, of course, that also has its own risks. And, so there's lots of issues, for instance, with polydrug use and risks of overdose. Other drugs will have a risk of dependence. Like I was saying with bloodborne viruses being transmitted through injecting, and often we'll find that people are injecting for other people. So there's great risks of bloodborne viruses that way. And the risk of STIs associated with some of the drug use, which I'll come to it in a second. So one thing that's particularly associated with gay and homosexually active men is Chem Sex. So Chem Sex is basically sex that you have while on chemicals, and it's quite a phenomenon in amongst the gay and homosexually active men communities. Not to say it's not in other communities, but we don't have a lot of data on that because unfortunately most of the research is done around the risks of HIV transmission, so we get a lot more data on gay and homosexually active men. But basically Chem Sex is sex while on chemicals. In Australia, the two favourite chemicals are GHB or GBL and methamphetamine. Chem sex involves two individuals, or it can often involve many individuals, and that'll happen a lot at like sex on premises clubs and also house parties. The way the meetings are set up is through hookup apps such as Grindr and Bareback Realtime. So it's, ACON, for instance, conducts ACON outreach onto like Grindr and stuff because it's about how do we access the people, when we don't see them, they're not going somewhere to socialise, it's all just done by apps and says, so-and-so's 300 metres away, hook up. So there's risks around STIs and other health issues to do with Chem Sex because often the sessions last for many hours and over several days, quite often. And the drugs increase arousal, they increase sexual performance and stamina, and they reduce inhibitions. So when people are doing that, like when they're engaging in Chem Sex, it's really important that that you encourage that they get tested regularly for HIV and STIs, particularly if they're having condomless sex. Other things are if someone is HIV positive, really need to promote that they're on treatment so that their viral load is undetectable, and that reduces risk of transmission. And we also want to make sure that people who aren't living with HIV are engaging in treatment. So a key one for that is PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis. And PrEP is really instrumental in preventing the transmission rates of HIV. If they are injecting as well, then, some people have mentioned like KRC has an NSP, so does ACON, so that's at 414 Elizabeth Street, which is where ACON is based. So any clients in Sydney who are wanting injecting equipment and harm minimisation information are also able to be referred to there. So the good news. Although there's really high rates of AOD use amongst LGBT communities, there's also high rates of help seeking. And lesbian and bisexual and queer women are 3 times more likely to seek treatment, and gay and bisexual men are 2 times more likely. So that's great news. However, we know that there's been no decrease in AOD use rates between 2010 and 2016. So that's not changing, so we need some changes in services and what's being provided. On a broad brushstroke, we need services to respond to the needs of everyone. We need services that acknowledge and respect diversity, services that do not discriminate against people or treat them unfairly on the basis of difference, services that challenge negative stereotypes, services that demonstrate person-centred care, and services that commit to a safer culture for all. Now, that was a big long list, but it's really important that we have those things with services because LGBT people face a lot of barriers to accessing services. Imagine a young person already has a whole lot of barriers to accessing a service and then add these things on top. So they can have prior negative experiences where the service has not been inclusive of them being LGBT, They can have a fear of not being taken seriously. They can fear prejudice and discrimination because they live with that on a daily basis. A big one is they can fear that their sexual orientation, gender experience or intersex status will be blamed as the cause of their problems. Often people don't know where to go. Young people often don't know where to go, and then if you take an LGBT person who's isolated and has a very small support network, then there's another barrier to knowing where they can get help. People may not want to come out, and office services will be like, if they have to come out as gay to get the sexual health services they need, then they may not do that. And there's often issues around shame and internalised homophobia and transphobia and a real fear of breached confidentiality. So what does inclusive practice look like? First of all, it means avoid assuming someone is or isn't LGBTI because of the way they look or what you see. Also, inclusive practice isn't measured by the number of people who disclose. A big one here is treating everyone the same is not necessarily meeting individuals' needs, i.e. a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a start, but you can do better, okay? And that's about going, reducing the barriers, being more proactive and bringing it up to a level playing field more. Use terms your client has conveyed to you. Check in on the pronouns that the people like to use. Do they identify as he or she or ze or they, or, there's a whole lot of pronouns, but use what's important to them. Use their name, use their preferred name, not their birth name, which I know can be difficult in some health settings, but even if you just acknowledge and go, if I have to use your birth name for your Medicare card or something, I get that that's difficult, and when possible I will use your preferred name, and I recognise that that is your real name. Also, use the terms they use to identify themselves. Do they call themselves gay? Do they call themselves pansexual? Do they call themselves bisexual? Whatever terms they use, reflect those back to them, and it goes a long way. Update your data system so LGBTI people can be seen. I'm going to just jump quickly. This is an example, for instance, that would be your data systems, but also your intake systems. So instead of just asking the binary question, are you male or female, or just assuming someone is heterosexual, you could perhaps start to put these questions into your intake processes and into your forms. I'll just give you a chance to have a quick look. The question about what gender were you assigned at birth, that's in relation to being transgender or gender diverse and wanting to capture that information, because we don't have a lot about it usually.
Can you just explain what queer is?
Yes, sorry. Okay, so queer is a reclaimed term. So queer is an umbrella term for people who identify as LGBTI, but queer can also be for someone who says that they don't, they'll use that term because they don't want to fit into one of those other labels. So queer, it's another one. It's like someone may be pansexual, they may be asexual, they may be polysexual. Basically, there's a lot of terms. And for what queer means, I think, see it as an umbrella term, but also see it as something that it would require more conversation with the young person. It's like, what does queer mean to you? So, yeah. All right, jumping back really quickly. Okay, so pop up some affirming posters and resources. ACON has some fantastic posters, so does 2010, which is another LGBTIQ service for young people, and the posters are free. Contact 2010, contact ACON. There's also the Gender Centre as well, and they have some fantastic resources for transgender and gender diverse people. All of these things will help create a welcoming and confidential and culturally appropriate environment for LGBTI people. Finally, I'd suggest that you update your inclusivity and diversity policy and put it on display and have it actually mention LGBTI people and LGBTIQ people if you wanted. So I'm just going to finish on, I'm going to share a story with you, a very quick story, but it's about identifying the difference between acceptance and inclusivity in your practice. So you think about a barbecue and you've got a vegetarian person coming and you're like, okay, well, we'll invite the vegetarian to the barbecue. We'll tell them, just bring your own sausages, your vegetarian sausages, and we'll pop them on the barbecue. And there we go, we like that, that vegetarian, we're accepting of them. That's acceptance, that's not inclusivity. Inclusivity is where you would go, oh, we've got a vegetarian person coming. Hey, when you come to the barbecue, we're going to have some vegetarian sausages there for you. We know that you have special needs, certain needs that come with that, and we'll cook the sausages separate to the meat ones. We've also got some vegetarian salads, and we're making an effort for you to feel included. So when you're thinking about your practice and thinking about, is our practice inclusive or accepting, maybe just think about that story and, how much of the onus is on the person coming and how much as a service can you do to be inclusive instead. Thank you.